Okay. All right. Well, good morning again. But let's go all the way back. But let me give us some guidance to really kind of help guide the conversation and remind us of what we were doing. We're using our HaYesod study, and they revised the HaYesod study from those of you who have been a part of God expectations for several years. We went across, we covered a HaYesod study in the past, and they revised the HaYesod lesson. And it starts off this time with the people of the book, and it highlights, how God using his story inside of, or he's using his story inside of their story, or vice versa. And it highlights his choosing of the Jewish people. But also in choosing the Jewish people, he has to highlight his choosing of Abram, who I like to refrain as the Gentile God chose to create the Jewish nation. And that's ironic and funny at the same time. If you know anything about the Jewish nation, is because they're always highlighting all the Gentiles that aren't Jewish. However, to create their nation, God chose a Gentile. And so, he chose Abram. But choosing Abram, or the call of Abram, some saying, you guys know me, I like to deviate away from using the word call. So the choosing of Abram, we have to look at the choosing of Isaac. And if we look at the choosing of Isaac, we got to look at the choosing of Jacob. And that's what I hope we're going to accomplish today with all of our readings. Is how did God choose Abram? How did God choose Isaac? And how did God choose Jacob? Because it didn't just fall in line through orders of birth. There was a divine intervention in that. We're going to look at that early on. Even when we go all the way back to Joseph, how did Joseph become the prominent son of Jacob? It wasn't divine order of birth. It was God's intervention, and we're going to try to highlight that. But also in the choosing of Abram, in the choosing of Isaac, and in the choosing of Jacob, it shows us how God adopted them as his sons. Because the old saying is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that was the identity of the God of creation, the God who created heaven and the earth. And how did people in ancient times, in biblical times, Old Testament times, that we like to say in our culture, Western, but how did God how was God identified the God of creation? He was identified as the God of Isaac, as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he adopted them as his son to create this special group of people to make himself, and the purpose of this is this. We can't lose sight of it, and some people tend to do, is he chose them to make himself known to the world. So that was his goal. From the very beginning, he created a plan, a strategic plan, a long drawn out strategic plan. But his goal was to introduce himself to the world, where the world wouldn't doubt who created him. And around today, I think with God accomplishes his goal. A lot of people struggle with a lot of things and all the diversities of different religions, but most of the major religions on the globe identify God as the creator of heaven and earth. So when you look at, Jewish religion, Christianity, and the Muslim religion, all of them identify this same God, whether they call him Allah or Hashem. We're still talking about, there's no confusion in my mind. They're like, man, I ain't praying to Allah. Well, that's just their Arabic name for the God of creation. They're not talking about a different God. Now, there's some details that deviate when they talk about things God have done that we may not follow. But when they just say Allah, they're referring to the God who created heaven and earth, the God who tailored out his created man in his image, creating Adam and Eve, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Same way with the Jewish nation. So we're talking about this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But how did he adopt them as his sons? How did he choose Abram? How did he choose Isaac? How did he choose Jacob is what we want to look at. We have to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 10, which we've had. So this is review, but it has a little more sense of order or purpose to it, you know. So yeah, let me pause because I said a lot, and I want to make sure anybody else had any comments, reflections, or thoughts they can have time to share them. Come on, Gina, I saw you just unmute. Was that intended?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I was just wondering, you said that, is he in there, case?
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm coming to get him. Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
if they're called Allah, they call him Allah, we call him God, right?
Yes.
Then why is there a separate why is there Muslim and Christian? I mean, why is it, I mean, you kind of understand what I'm trying to say?
I, I do. I do. It's because the rest of the identity, I understand it. Now, the description of following God's story is where it differs. So that's the discrepancy, right? They have a different account of his story, or their story of God changes from where we see it because of other literature that they follow. But it originated from the same source, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, go sit on the couch. All right. But yeah, if that makes sense. So yeah. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions or reflections on that from anybody else?
So Abraham would be the father of Judaism, I think you call it. The father of Islam, I don't know these different religions, and the father of Christianity.
Correct.
So he's the so when you go to Jerusalem, all these people here are calling Abraham their father, right? Uh, and they they it's not confusing, but it's I don't know. Maybe it is confusing to me. I don't know because here they are saying Abraham. The Jews people are saying Abraham is their father. The Muslims are saying Abraham is their father, and we Christians are saying Abraham is our father. And I reckon because I go back to what we started off by saying, God saying that I will make you a father of many nations. That
Yes.
would answer that, I think.
You're exactly right. So the difference or the difference starts with the genealogy. And that's what we're going to try to pay attention to, right? Come on, Soup, you have a comment.
I was going to say one thing to remember that Isaac and Esau grew up in the same household. So
Yeah.
is that right? Esau, right? No, Isaac
Yes.
and
Hold on, Isaac. You talking Isaac and Ishmael?
Isaac and Ishmael.
Yeah.
Isaac and Ishmael grew up in the same household, so they would have been taught the same thing in the Beit Al.
Yes.
And I guess if we really wanted to see where Islam began to branch off, you'd have to start, like Kayusi said, with the not the gen what you call the generations? You used the word a while ago.
Genealogy.
Yeah, the genealogy, and see where it branched off into where the doctrine began to split off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, God told, he promised that Ishmael would be the father of a great nation as well. You know, Ishmael had 12 sons, just like Abraham did. It's just that they worship the same God, but they've interpreted God differently than the Jews, because the Jews were the chosen people, not Ishmael's side.
Yeah. And it's a matter of interpretation. It all boils down to a matter of interpretation. But I think it's important for us to embrace it. Now, this is my opinion. I'm jumping into something totally different here. This is my opinion. I'm gonna say that one more time. I'm about to share my opinion on it. When Jesus refers to having, sheep of another fold, or y'all know what I mean. I'm opinionated to believe that it's referring to the other two religions, Muslim, through the genealogy of Ishmael, as well as, the Jewish, differences in Orthodox, that type of thing. So I hadn't done a whole deep dive study and all of that, but if you trace out the genealogies from Genesis, you'll see that, as God promised, he delivered. He promised Abraham to be a father of many nations. And then he spoke blessings over Ishmael, as John is referencing, and promised that he will be a great nation as well. He's just not the nation. And we know the nation meant the nation that the Messiah would actually come out of, right? To trace out God's story. So we have to pay attention, because again, we're looking for God's story and how it unfolds. It's the greatest story ever told. And the end result of that is Jesus Christ, or Messiah Christ, or because Messiah and Christ is interchangeable, however you want to look at it. But also it goes back to the commission called Great, and it looks at God's purpose impacting the globe, global vision, global impact. But it started with God promising that he would make himself known. And he chose Abraham to do so. He chose Abram to make himself known to the people of the earth, because they did not know God. And we want to start there. Any other comments, questions, or reflections, or just thoughts?
So all that you said is that's to let us know that God do the choosing, correct?
We're going to see that.
Okay.
See that.
Okay, that's what I want to see. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to see that. Come on, Sue.
And that thing you said, this is good, Pastor. That thing you said, a matter of interpretation. That's even in Judaism, the Orthodox, and when you get to Messianic, there's going to be a matter of interpretation there. And then I think in Islam, when you talk about Shiite, Sunni, all them who have battles against one another, it's even a matter of interpretation when it comes to Quran.
Yes.
But we're talking about this up to a certain point. That's why we can that's why we can sit down and dialogue with Muslims up at least to the prophets, because everything lines up on both sides up to that, at least, right? From creation through the prophets, everything on both sides kind of lines up together with that, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 And we're going to see it unfold. I'm going to make it my business for the next week to try to research, origins of some of those other religions, so we can kind of see where they come out of. Hadn't prepared that for this week, although the topic came up. But what I have, and what I believe we'll see is, how did, as Will framed it, how did we see God's intervention in choosing Abram? And choosing Abraham, where it could have went a lot of other ways if we went with the order of rights or birthrights that we're going to look at, but he didn't, and it fell on Abram. It's not the way we think of it when we casually read. And even with Isaac, it didn't, or the birthright didn't fall on Ishmael. It fell on Isaac. Same way with Jacob. So we see God's divine intervention, in this, in his special choosing of people, or again, spiritual people like to call it the calling of people, but again, that's nebulous and confusing. So we'll see God's choosing, his selective choosing method. But it's purposeful, because you see purposes fulfilled and godly stories built with significance. And it creates a good narrative for us to know God's story and his intent. So yeah, any other thoughts, comments, and questions before we begin? Let's go back and look at Noah again. All right, let's go back and look at Noah again. And I had these lined out, but when that worship is playing, I have to erase these. So let me see if I can remember. I think I got them wrote down. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 10. Let me get a couple of these open. Let's go to Genesis chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 1. Yeah, we're just going to try to see what we see, or pay attention to the story. The key or the admonition is pay attention to the story. Keep the story in mind. It's not a literal story, but pay attention to the story. All right. But so yeah.
Chosen.
Hey, what's going on?
I tried to ask a question, but I made a mistake and left. Is Abraham and Abraham the same person?
Yes. Good question. Good question. All right. It's a matter of language. Abraham or Abram is more of a Chaldean type language, and Abraham, God changes it. It goes from father to many fathers. Am I right, Sue? All right, excellent. So yeah, so it started off with the father, Abram, and then when God made that promise to make him into a father of many nations, Abraham means many fathers. So yes, but same person, same name. Yeah. When we want to pay attention, we're going to see that.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, and some also say, KUC, that when covenants were made, that the dominant or the greater part in the covenant gave their dominant gutturals of their names to the lesser part in the covenant, and the AH being the dominant gutturals in God's name went on to Abraham's name when he was in the covenant. There's some theology out there about that too. Like Abraham, like Yahweh.
Yeah. Him. Yeah. So yeah. All right. Good stuff. All right. All right. Let's go to Genesis. I guess some pages to different passages. We'll keep them open. Any other thoughts before we begin? And again, take notes, but the lessons like this, the recording is going to be vitally important. All right. So yeah. All right. Somebody read verse. Let me see how far. Let's just read and take our time, and we'll be prepared to stop for questions. Anybody have any questions? Remember, speak up. Say stop right here. I have a question or whatever, but speak up. I know it takes time to unmute, so we can back up, no problem. But somebody start reading for us. Verse 1.
I can read.
Okay.
And then down to when?
I'll let you know. We're gonna read through this. I think this entire chapter, if I'm correct.
Okay. All right, I'm coming from ESV. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland people spread in their lands, each with his own language by their clans and their nations. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The son.
Mhm. Sorry, pause one moment. I want to ask a question. What seems ironic to anybody so far? Does anybody see anything out of order or slightly different? Read verses 1 through 5 again, if you don't mind.
These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland people spread in their lands, each with his own language by their clans and their nations.
Let me give us something. So we in a genealogy, and so we got. This is a Jewish writing, right? The Jewish individuals told these genealogies orally for years, and during the exile is when a lot of this was penned or written down. So this was a story that was preserved. Every father's responsibility was to tell this to his Beta, and he would repeat that story, and eventually, he assigned it to the firstborn son, and it was his responsibility. So these things were passed down orally until it was written down. So the content is written in a Jewish literary work, so to speak. So there was rules that they applied to certain things when they wrote, and they believed in listing things out from the oldest to the youngest. So that's one thing. They would highlight, the fathers. We're going to see this, and I'm going to go back and we'll see it. The fathers, when they first mention a father's name, they would mention his name at the age. His age would be around the birth of his firstborn son. So we'll see that. So there were certain rules in the genealogy, the literary work the Jewish people wrote, unless there was a point the author was trying to make. So now the mode of discovery or midrash happens for the students to pay attention, because there's a time where there's a point hidden in the story. That's why it's not literary. There's always message. We have to pay attention. So as we read, we look for orders, lists, and all those things, but we got to pay attention when something is out of order. Then that means there's emphasis there, and the writer is trying to point out a lesson he's teaching us as the reader and the students. So with that said, read it one more time, verse 1 through 5.
These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland people spread in their lands, each with their own language by their clans and their nations. So the genealogy starts with the youngest son.
Yeah. Say that one more time.
it looks like the genealogy starts with Japheth, which is the youngest son of Noah, versus Shem.
Okay. All right. Great point. Anybody else? Everybody see that?
She said that the genealogist started with Japheth, and he was the youngest son.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And correct. Or he appears to be the youngest son. So that's the question, right? And the writer is strategic to say, is Japheth the youngest son? Or is there a message about Japheth he's trying to teach us? Or is Shem the oldest son? Or is there a message about Shem he's trying to teach us? So that's what the writer's strategy is in this genealogy. And it's for you or me as the students to figure it out. All right.
Hey, who was the one that initiated the walking backwards over his daddy and his nakedness?
Shem.
Shem. So great point. When you see things like that happening, you have to go back and read those stories. All right. Where is that story? Let's go back. Let's go back. Appreciate this stuff. Let's see where it is.
Right there in chapter 9.
Yeah, so let's go back to 9. And I wasn't prepared, but I should have been. All right. But we got to go back to chapter 9. So let me give us a narrative. All right. Catch us up. After the flood, God blesses Noah. He re-emphasizes his first command to mankind. His first command to mankind was to be fruitful and to multiply and to replenish the earth and to subdue it and have dominion. That was his first command to mankind or humankind or to Adam. However, he leaves out 2 of the 5. He only tells Noah after the flood to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. We talked about it. It's because the state and condition of mankind is different. Earlier, mankind was without sin. They were blameless. So it was okay, and they were created in the image of God. So that image of God was not distorted yet. So it was okay for them to have dominion and to subdue and have dominion, because they were subduing in God's image and they were having dominion, maintaining that in God's image. However, the heart of man is different. That's why he destroyed them with the flood. It's because the heart of man was corrupt. And they went after their desires, the sinful desires, continually. And so here he only emphasized the command. He still wants them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So this is the mission of mankind right now, is to fill the earth. And we got to think about it. To fulfill that mission, things that we do things that they do in our culture will be frowned on, and things that they did in their culture will be frowned on in our culture because it looks like incest. But they got to think their mission was to fulfill or to fill the earth, and the only way they could do it was to marry their cousin, sister, or their brother. I mean, something like that, because they're fulfilling God's first mission for mankind, filling the earth. They had a purpose. All right. The earth is full now, so therefore we don't have to do that. So it's frowned upon, and God begins to establish ethics in our culture. But that's the mission, filling the earth. And that's why these genealogies are important. It's showing us how God filled the earth. All right, comments, questions, or thoughts on that so far? All right. So let's go down to the point where just verse 8 for context. Verse 8 for context.
But you talking about in chapter 9?
Yeah, we're in chapter 9 now.
Okay. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Now behold, this 9. Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you.
So just pause. This is the first covenant God made with man. It's called the Noahic covenant. The Jewish people read the Bible and they order or they section it out on covenants, 10 covenants. This is the first covenant. Oh, not 5 covenants, I'm sorry. But this is the first covenant. And God says he made the covenant with Noah and Noah's sons. So guess what? We're a part of this covenant because we're part of Noah's sons. That word sons, the plural, this means generations and generations and generations and generations until it finally reaches you. So God made this covenant with Noah and you. He made this covenant with Noah and me. He made this covenant with Noah and us. All right. So let's pay attention to the covenant. All right. And the covenant is simple. So someone read verse 11.
I will establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the waters of the flood. Neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth.
Period. That's the covenant. You know, and it ends with a period. It's simply as covenants are built on words, and the words are agreement. But here, normally a covenant is 2 parties have to agree to deduce some deliverables or things. Here, God is the only deliverable. It's just us accepting and embracing the fact that God promised that we won't be destroyed by flood. The earth won't be destroyed by the flood again. And that's a covenant he made with us. So we won't be cut off by water ever again. And now there's always a sign of a covenant. And so now the next verse shows us the sign. So there's the words of the covenant, and then there's the sign of the covenant. All right, verse 12.
Is that where the rainbow come in effect, guys?
Excellent. Yes. Excellent. All right, and you'll get to know when I say excellent, that means you're right.
Hey, Pastor.
Yes, sir.
Brother Will, in his prayer this morning he was either in his prayer or before his prayer was talking about the importance of the women. How important were these 3 women on the ark?
Oh man, vital. See,
very.
It actually is so important. It's not even mentioned, but there's no generation that sun. How important we talked about the S on the sun. It don't happen without the women. It don't happen without the women. So vitally important. Yeah. Vitally important. And we'll see. Matter of fact, my whole point I wanted to make today highlights a message God gave to an important. I won't give it away. No, so won't be no spoiler alert. But the message that I don't know, the way I studied, I always think about one moment, a big moment of discovery. And the moment of discovery I had today, and hopefully we'll get there, was how significant a vision God gave to a woman in the Bible that he didn't give to the important man. And I was like, whoa, I hadn't noticed that before. But we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. That way, none of y'all won't tune out until we get there, because now you want to know. All right. But yeah. So let's keep going. So we got the words of the covenant. Now we have the sign of the covenant, as KC highlighted, and it's the symbol of the rainbow. So read verse 12.
God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you, and every living creature that is with you for all succession generation."
All right, so that's important. So now we didn't get the intent of the plurals, the S on the sons. God said, I'm gonna make it plain. This covenant is for you, Noah, your sons, and all successive generations. So that means generations before you and generations after you. And when it gets to us, it's generations before us and generations after us. This covenant stands forever. As long as there is life on earth, this covenant is made with every person who's given life on earth. That's what that means, all successive generations. Now let's look at the sign. Verse 13.
I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth.
Yeah. All right. Now, this is something we struggle with. How to convince somebody God is real. The next time you encounter someone who's in doubt of whether or not God exists, ask them, have they ever seen a rainbow? And ask them, do they know why the rainbow is hidden in the cloud? That may not convince them, but what you want to trust is that every time they see a rainbow, they think about your challenge. Then we trust God in the process, right? But tell them, hey, just have you ever seen a rainbow? Do you know why the rainbow's in the sky? Did you not know that it was a sign from God to all the generations that he will never destroy the earth by a flood again? They may not believe it, but they may do. If they do, you know what to do. Continue to invest in them. If they don't, trust God. Pray for God for the next conversation and point, but at least it'll create a discussion or it'll create a moment of inquisitiveness in their hearts. And every time they see that rainbow, they're going to think about those words. And God will work with them. God will do amazing things in their life. All right.
Wait a minute, Pastor.
Come on.
Okay, before we go no further, you say, ask them, why is the rainbow in the sky? That's the question I should ask them, right?
Yes.
Okay, and leave it at that.
Yeah, because what I'm hoping when I ask is that we're gonna get into this past. They're gonna ask me, show me. That's what I'm working on, and I get a chance to open the Bible up and let God go to work in their heart. So yeah.
Great strategy.
Have you ever noticed that the bow is pointed away from the earth?
I have not, John. It's good.
You noticed that.
Good. Connection from us to God, right? Highway to heaven.
That's right. If that bow was pointed toward us, he might be a different sign.
Yeah. Good stuff. I am not.
No, go ahead, man. I ain't gonna mess with that. Go ahead.
Sure. You sure?
Well, there's some accounts to where, where we talk about Yara, meaning to send rain.
Yeah.
And that God is the kind of like the warrior of the heavenly host, kind of in that frame.
Yeah.
And that the flood was like him shooting water arrows down on the earth with a warrior's bow. And then when a warrior is finished shooting his arrows with his bow, what does he do with it? He hangs it upside down to say he's finished with it.
Yeah.
So to Brother John's point, when it was raining, that thing was turned the opposite way toward the earth, because that's where the arrows were coming down of rain, and that's one story of it. But then when they finished, he turned it upside down, and that signifies the rainbow, like you said, Brother John, that the bow is turned the other way.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for filling that out. I guess it's also good to notice, that this is really the only covenant that includes the Gentiles. Would you say that? Because all the other covenants seem to be made with the nation of Israel. This one includes everybody and all the successive generations.
I answer that with a careful potentially, it seems, because although a lot of those covenants were initiated with Jewish people, God still intended for them to reach non-Jewish people at some point, although they were established with Jewish people. And it was a covenant Jewish people were expected to keep initially. But some kind of way those covenants, because this is God's story of how he's going to use them to impact the nations around them. So there's a significance for them in purity. But the challenge is, and I mentioned this before in one of the groups I lead throughout the week, I can't remember which group it was, but the challenge of it is at some point, the mistake Jewish people made is they thought God was only for them. And that's where the challenges came in during the Great Commissions. All right, is because when Paul and Barnabas began to see God working on non-Jewish people, they knew God's story was for everybody. And they were afraid, or they were cautious about how they should bring this back to the leadership in Jerusalem, because they knew that in their culture, they expected God to work in the Jewish nation only. So Paul and Barnabas sought counsel with the Jewish nation, the Jerusalem council, to bring word to them to make sure they weren't out of order by leading all these Gentiles to God or Christ. But that very caution of how they set this meeting up shows us that the Jewish people originally thought God was only for them. And they found out otherwise through Barnabas and Paul's work. So that lets me know that although the covenant started with the Jewish people, God had an intent or a purpose that was beyond them, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Well, but shouldn't a Gentile, if you think that through, I mean, if the covenants were for the Jews, and yes, around Acts 15 or somewhere where Cornelius, opened the door to the Gentile, to the nations, the way we should look at it is that Christianity did not replace Judaism. The Christians in actuality should be, I guess if the Jews are the chosen people, I mean, we as Christians need to view the Jewish nation. I'm just not talking about, the nation of Israel as it is today, but the people of God. We need to, we need to be kind of alongside them in order to bring in the Messianic era, because it won't be until we all come together and, because we're just grafted in. The Jews are the ones that's going to rule. I mean, King Messiah is going to be ruling from Jerusalem, and it's going to be, we as part of the nations are going to be headed for the temple. Once during the Messianic era. I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's just I've just been reading a lot of stuff, and it's these, the scriptures just kind of point that stuff out.
I got a question right here. For John, you brought out something good. And Pastor, you can help us with this, or anybody. Would God call it Judaism and Christianity? Would God call it that? Would those words come out of his mouth, or did he coin the words Judaism and Christianity, or are those actions that are identified that came with living out God's doctrine?
So I agree. We know God didn't, God is sovereign. But he didn't originally call followers of Christ Christians. So we know that. So we could actually say, take the liberty to say, he didn't coin the term Christians to identify his followers. Judaism, on the other hand, I got to look at all of that to really, speak clearly into that. But I'm following your line of thinking. Like there's a group of people that God expects to be his followers. And now we're struggling with distinguishing whether or not that group should be called Christians or Jews or the nation of Jews. And God may have a whole other thought of it all and say, you know what, I just look at you as such. Is that kind of where you're going, Sue?
Yeah. because it seems as if those terms were coined in humanity, and it seems as if they identify the lifestyle or how doctrine was lived out. And I know that's what Christianity is, and I'm just wondering if Judaism is the same way, because I've not read anywhere in the Bible where God calls anybody either one himself.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sue, because it's the the term Jew was coined after Judah. It's like, because of the tribe of Judah, so they call people Jews, back in the in the days of the pilgrims and stuff, they were certainly called Jews, but they were also referred to as Hebraic, because a lot of people, they still used Hebrew a lot. And of course, Christian, that term is a pejorative term, and they were first called Christians in Antioch, and that was to actually make fun of people. And so, yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, I've never in the scriptures seen where God anoints them as Judaism or Jews. He calls them, the nation, Israel, the nation of Israel, or he calls them Jeshurun, when he's happy with them. But it's yeah, I think a lot of times we get caught up in, we just believe in a paradigm. We've just boiled the gospel down to such a simple thing that Christ died on the cross, his blood protects us from our sins. Paul says the law's not of any use anymore, and I think that's a bad paradigm. And when you really get into it, Jesus never preached that I'm going to die and my blood's going to cover you. What he did when Jesus in Mark, when he started out, he said, he came out saying, repent because the kingdom of God is at hand. In heaven, I just don't think we're going to be sitting on a cloud playing a harp. Heaven, in Matthew, heaven is they use the word heaven because they didn't want to use the word God. So the kingdom of heaven is the same thing as the kingdom of God. It's used interchangeably, in scripture. So, but my mind's just really, just a lot of things are through this study, and you can just go pretty deep with it. There's just a lot to it. So I'll be quiet, but I don't want to say anything that's not, that would certainly interfere with our teaching, but I'm just pointing out some things that have come to me as I've been studying.
Yep. And they'll continue to come. God will make sense out of them as we mature, or as we continue to search out the scripture. So, but this is what I think. I don't have an answer or a direct answer, but this is what I think. As we walk through these early accounts, let's pay attention to that. Let's see if we can identify a unified name God calls people, or let's see if we pay attention to where the names originated from, if they originated out of humanity's theology or doctrines. So let's just pay attention to that as we walk through this. I think it's perfect time to bring it up. Come on, Zena.
No, I wait. I think you're gonna answer my question in a minute. Because you said we're struggling with it. That kind of, I'm like, why are we struggling with this? Not with the conversation, but with what we're called. Are we supposed to be called ourselves Christians? Are they supposed to be called themselves Muslims? That's why I said I think you're gonna answer my question.
Yep. So, yeah. And I say we're struggling with it because when you just think about the term, where it originated, we know and we can trace out biblically that God never intended or didn't start out calling the followers of Christ Christians. They were called disciples of Christ or people of the way, because they didn't even know what to call it. So they started saying the people of the way, and that meant the revealed way God intended, for his followers to travel or to adhere to. And so they were people of the way. Those people originated out of a Jewish culture, and eventually Paul and Barnabas showed us that it didn't exclude non-Jewish people. So now God is expanding our understanding and vision of his people. And eventually the term Christian fell on the followers of Christ. But that term is struggle because that term begins to do the same thing that the Jewish people did. And that's to exclude other people from it. Now Christians start to exclude all Jewish people from being.
Ooh, that's big. You're exactly right, Case. That's a tremendous. Christianity has has issues that, it's kind of an exclusive club, and a lot of the way it's presented in many situations.
Yeah, the error both made is to exclude or exclusion. And matter of fact, when we look at the story, when God first speaks to Abraham, you'll see he always had a vision of inclusion. He wanted to include all of the nations, but it was a way he felt he had a methodology or a strategy to impact the nation. We just got to trust this process because it worked. Right? We think about, and even now we look at the Great Commission. It was a message or command of inclusion, right? To eliminate the exclusion in our lives. And again, we tend to gravitate, or our error in missing the mark is to gravitate to make it inclusive for only those who look like me. Come on, Zane.
So if, like you said, where did the exclusion begin? Because here's a stupid question, right? If Jesus was a Jew, why aren't we Jews? Why aren't we all Jews? Why aren't we all called Jews? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have now. Unfortunately, I have an answer for that because of what I've understood. Now, y'all follow me out. My answer to why, if Jesus is a Jew and why we aren't all Jews, my answer goes all the way back to the promise he made with Abraham. And that means he said, I'm going to use you to make all the families of the earth blessed. And who was that? The Jews, or the Jewish people from Abraham's lineage. So Jesus was a fulfillment of God's promise to cause all the other nations to be blessed. That didn't necessarily call for all of us to be Jewish, but it was a fulfillment of God's promise to bless all nations. All right. Now, are there certain Jewish customs or doctrines we should all adhere to? I think so. The confusion or the challenge comes in, what do I keep? What do I not keep? And I don't have the answer for that, if that helps.
That's laid out in the Didache. But what happens, I think, if you, in Galatians and Ephesians, if we understand that correctly, those were both, letters from Paul, and he was dealing with that very question, Zena, if I'm a Gentile and.
Hey, John, hold one moment before we add. I want to try to see, Zena, did any of that make sense before we add any more?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, come on, John.
Yeah. Well, the good news, is that we can, that we can all be in the kingdom. But the sociological problem was the Gentiles were like, well, okay, well, that means we all need to be Jews, because, the Jews had kind of made that clear. You can't be in the kingdom unless you're a Jew, because, God chose us. And then, of course, Paul, that was, my gospel was, no, you don't have to be a Jew. Now, you're going to have to obey the Torah, but you're not going to have to do the works of the law, which included the dietary laws, the circumcision. Those are things that, it's the basics, it's the milk, baptism, repentance. Those are the things that's required of the Gentiles. Although, we're certainly welcome to, eat the way a Jew eats, and certainly celebrate the festivals. Until basically the 3rd century or so, when there was tremendous persecution, the Gentiles went to the temple. They worshipped with the Jewish people, and because Christianity was a sect within Judaism. It was not, I'm a Christian, you're a Jew. A rabbi, you ask a rabbi, what is a Jew, and they say not a Christian. Or you ask a preacher, what's a Christian, and he'll say not a Jew. So there's where there's a lot of angst and there's a lot of problems. A lot of angst between Jews and Gentiles, and I think there's going to have to be a real come together between the nations and the Jewish people, before that messianic, before Christ will come back and the messianic era begins.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Was Abraham keeping the law when God chose him?
Good question.
Was Abraham keeping the law when God chose him?
Let's keep that question before us, because we're going to answer it in our reading today.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, good question.
Well, Pastor, didn't I don't know how to say this, but did not our spiritual lineage start in the promise of Abraham?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, then that means our spiritual lineage started from a Gentile perspective, and really maybe, and I want to be careful with this, but not really a Jewish perspective.
Great. All right, I got this.
Hold on, say that again, Pop, please.
Yeah, messed me up too. I messed up on it too. But the promise, our spiritual lineage, the promise of our spiritual lineage started with Abraham, right?
Correct.
And he's a Gentile.
Yes.
And Jesus' physical body for the work he did on the cross came through that lineage, correct?
Correct.
And there were Gentiles in Jesus' biological lineage. Is that right?
Correct.
So, but God birthed him in the Jewish nation, and I don't know if it's so much the model. They had the sacrifices and all that stuff, but I think we got to back all this thing up to Abraham, because Abraham's righteousness was even imputed to him toward the future also. Right. And that promise in him. So I don't want to confuse it, but that's just, I know we're stopping with the Jewish people, but I'm not sure we're going back far enough.
Well, if you go back to note that what we just read there in Genesis, from these people, all the nations were born. From that, there's 70 nations, and that's but it's like if you were a member of the Sanhedrin, you had to speak 70 languages. I mean, I read that in one of my things so that you could understand what everybody was talking. I mean, so the nations, and of course, God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees to make him a nation, to reveal himself, to reveal God to the 70 nations. So, but anyway, Casey, I know you've got something planned here and you're going to take us right to it. So I'm going to shut up, and these are just some thoughts I've been having. I hope I hadn't confused everybody, but it definitely makes you think.
Come on, Sue.
Yeah, I was just trying to, I was tracking along with Miss Zena there when she was asking about should we not all like be Jewish? And my thought was we even got to go all the way back to Abraham, because the lineage started in a Gentile beginning.
Yep. I agree, and I think that's where we head. So, matter of fact, I got a Jewish study Bible, and the most of the rabbis, the midrashim, or commentaries from those Jewish theologians, they have a saying about Abraham, the Gentile who fathered the Jewish nation. That's their common thought of who Abraham is, right? And it's ironic. So here is a Gentile who fathered this Jewish nation built on this purity of being Jews. So again, it goes back to the sovereignty of God. Is that the most important aspect of it all? I don't want to minimize or diminish any importance of it, but is it the most important aspect? So yeah, come on, Will.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm okay, because like I say, Abraham received everything he got, not by keeping the law.
Yeah.
Abraham, the law was 430 years after, I think, Abraham received the promises from God, right? And there's a lot of people that in the Bible that was born, and they was born like Abraham, but they was not Abraham's sons, But like I say, I think if we learning it all right here. This is the part that we got to, like I say, get up to this. And so I appreciate what we doing right now.
So I think we got to pay attention. What was so special about Abraham? We're going to look at that. I think we talked about it because was he following some type of biblical order or discipline or doctrine? And it doesn't highlight what he learned, but he learned something about God. And God is establishing over and over, and he's kind of creating this, or not creating it, but he's building it in front of us so we can see what's important to God. When I first read the Bible, what I didn't know to do that I did is I always paid attention to what was important to God. Whether I knew how to study or not, in my reading, as I read the Bible over and over, I just was constantly highlighting, this seems like this is important to God. This seems like, and that's what stood out. And over time, KUC Donald changed. He went from this guy who was stuck on this particular lifestyle and vision to the point where he keep reading the Bible and God keep pointing out what's important to him. And eventually those things became important to me. So I think we have to pay attention to what's important to God. And there's something about Abram that God says was important to him. And it points to the fact that this may be one of the reasons why God chose. We got to pay attention to it. So yeah.
Do you think it might have been something in the stars, Pastor?
What you mean?
Well, they were astrologers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, people, astrologers, astronomers. Who studies the stars?
Come on, John, help us out. Astronomers.
Okay.
Yeah, astronomers.
And remember, the Magi were not really what you would call Christ followers, anything. They weren't what we would call believers in God, but they showed up at the manger by following those stars, by reading the stars.
Correct. Man, good stuff. So yeah, good stuff.
So that being said, Soup, this is what we getting into now. This with chapter 9, I think this gonna lead up and show us how is to what we trying to get to, you know.
Eventually. So let me remind us of what we're doing. Great
Okay.
conversation. Again, that's why the recording is important. But I always keep the big questions in mind. We want to see what happened in the genealogy with Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Okay.
Is Japheth the youngest child, or is he the oldest child? Is Japheth the youngest child, or is he the oldest child? And why the order is different? Because they do have a certain literary way of writing things from oldest to youngest. So what's the message, or what's the point? And we want to pay attention. And Soup highlighted the fact that there was a special event. A lot of times the order changes when there's a special event. God included women in genealogies when there was a special event to highlight the significance of that woman. Most of the time they were left out. So we got to pay attention to if there was a special event. And the same event is going to help us see if there was a special event with Abram. I'll go ahead and give it to us. We look at the order of Abram's family genealogy. It seems to have the same confusion as Noah's sons. So was there a special event? And that's what we want to pay attention to, because a lot of times we read the Bible and we don't really put it in order. And we think everything is still following order. Immediately what we assume is we assume Japheth was the oldest. I'm sorry, Shem was the oldest and Japheth was the youngest. We just immediately read it and said that's how it is. But is that the case? Or is there a special event? So let's pay attention to the special event. All right. Or let's see if there was a special event. All right. So yeah. All right. But here we go. But good stuff, man. Great stuff. See, this is why. Can I share a little bit of your story, KC, if you don't mind? All right.
Yeah, you can.
All right. So what he said when he reached out to his mama and myself about his encounter with God, he had a dream. Won't get into all of that, but it was significant enough for him to consider how he's living his life. So basically, like, okay, go to church. Like, no, I ain't going to church because it's a lot of confusion there. Y'all send me the link so I can join with y'all. My point of bringing it out is discussions like this have never happened in church. And this is where the understanding of what we've always been taught is found. This is why I highlight how significant you guys are, or we are as a community, because people can't get this in church. You can't ask questions to lead us from one place to another. But whether we realize it or not, all those questions are going back to the same place. It's helping us think deeper about God's story. And it's helping us put things in order to answer all those unanswered questions that cause us not to be solid in our faith. And so, again, I just highlight how important this community is and all these different questions and thoughts. So thank y'all. Thank y'all. All right. So again, let's pay attention to special events. That's what we want. We want to look at the list and orders and see how consistent they are. And then all of a sudden, we'll see some inconsistencies people try to discredit the Bible with. But the inconsistencies aren't inconsistencies. They're just God highlighting a discovery for it. And the people who say they're inconsistent hadn't studied to pay attention to the discovery of its significance. And God is speaking to us through this. So let's pay attention. All right. So we see the covenant God made. We see the bow as the sign of the covenant. All right. Now let's look at verse 18 again. Somebody read verse 18.
Now the sons of Noah who came out of the ark was Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan.
All right. So once again, we see this order. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. However, we see some inconsistency. There's something that that God wanted to mention about Ham and the Canaan. We know how important the Canaanites were. Again, you got to remember when it was actually written down. So when the writers wrote this or penned this in writing, they were in exile. And they knew and understood how important the Canaanites were, because they knew that was the land God would actually dispossess and bestow upon Abraham and his descendants. So that's the purpose of it. There was always an event or something significant God is pointing out. So he does something out of order by mentioning Ham, who's the father of Canaan. All right. The middle child. So it has nothing to do with youngest or eldest. It was just a special event God wanted to highlight. Verse 19, somebody.
Okay. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these were the whole earth populated.
God's fulfillment of his first commission. Be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. He's just showing us that, hey, my mission was fulfilled through the sons of Noah. The earth was replenished or filled. All right. So let's keep going. Now we got to pay attention to what's happening or the special event. So somebody start from verse 20 all the way to verse 24 for right now.
All right. Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it up on both of their shoulders and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. And their face was turned away, so they did not see the father nakedness. When Noah awoken from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him.
What questions do y'all have? Y'all see what I see?
Yeah.
What do you see?
The youngest son was Ham.
Come on now. So Shem nor Japheth is the youngest. All right. First of all, from God's words himself, Ham was the youngest. So there had to be a special event. Now, how do we determine who's the oldest? Now, this is what's called the Jewish studies of Midrash. In the Jewish literary works of commentaries about what happened, normally to honor someone who done a special thing, they would reverse the order and mentioning them in genealogies and listings. So, and it also accredits the idea of something noble to that individual. So here, because Shem's name was mentioned first, it strongly suggests that the idea of taking a garment to lay it on their father's shoulders and to walk in backwards as not to dishonor their father the way the youngest brother did, it accredits that idea to Shem. And because he did a noble thing to honor him in the way God would honor him, is mention his name first. So what does this mean? Most likely Japheth was the oldest. Shem was the next to the oldest, and Ham was the youngest. But the genealogy was written to honor Shem for his noble act. We got to get that. Because now we talked about certain laws. This was a law that started or an order of how to handle certain things. The law first mentioned. So we're going to see this mentioned. This happened here first, but we're going to see something else happen with Abram to help us identify the ages of Terah's children. Come on, Sue.
So what you're saying is this is this is a moment in time being described.
Yes.
Like we're describing now the shot hit with 1 second left. That's what we're describing.
Yes.
Not necessarily who is the MVP, who's the highest paid player on the team, who's the team captain. We're right here in this one moment of time describing the dude that hit the 1 second shot.
Yes.
And then when we go back to the other, I don't get ahead. When we get back over here to this other, then we go back to the team with Japheth, and then we just say who comes out the tunnel first at every game.
Yes. 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 So yes. Yes. The hero. All right. The hero of the moment. All right.
It's good, man.
It was his idea.
What's up, KC?
Yeah. It was his idea.
I hear you.
Yeah. All right. You got his response back, Soup? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So God is honoring him. And guess what? He honors him for a generation. That the best way you can be honored by God is to be mentioned in the Bible a certain way. And so here God, so we know it wasn't just the writers who wanted to honor him, God wanted to honor him. And he does so, right? So we see that. So we got to pay attention. All right, very significance to the next section we're getting ready to go to. Other comments, questions, and thoughts.
So just so I'm clear, Shem hit the last second shot, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And he pulls his older brother to the side and says, hey, look, bro, man, to avoid the mistake our youngest brother just did, I got an idea. To not dishonor our father, let's cover him, but when we do it, let's grab this thing and we're going to walk in back. You with me? Jephthah acknowledges the fact that that's a great idea, little bro. Let's do it. But to honor him, God honors him through the writers of mentioning him first, and they continue to honor him as they mention the genealogies of Noah's sons to show that he was honored. And so what that means is this writing wasn't happening at the in a chronological way, because if it was happening in a chronological way, there's no way it would have been written down with Jephthah first. But the story was told, and when the story was finally written, they wrote it to honor him. So yeah.
So Japheth got the assist.
Yes, he did. He did. He did. And guess what? The humility of Japheth, it allows him as the eldest of the firstborn. So that wasn't necessarily a thing, although it just kind of passed down that the birthright and the eldest of the firstborn will have a birthright and the inheritance will fall. But however, in the mention, it shows his humility, or it shows humility. And it places him in the order of genealogy last because his humility allowed his little brother, his younger brother, to shine, so to speak. This was his spotlight, So yeah. All right. Now, I don't have the answer, but I'm just starting something. What if this is the reason why God chose Abraham to dispossess the Canaanite land? Because Ham is a descendant of Canaan is a descendant of Ham. And God chooses to dispossess the Canaanites of their land as a part of this curse, or this promised curse.
It's interesting that God cursed Canaan, which was Ham's. So he cursed his grandson instead of cursing Ham. Ham's the one that saw his father's nakedness, but instead of Noah cursing Ham, he cursed his grandson Canaan. That's interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about probably most likely why. Is because a father had a child to live out his legacy. And the child's purpose was to highlight the legacy of the father. So the best way to hurt a father was to hurt his children. Or the best way to curse a father was to curse his children. So maybe that's it. So yeah, maybe that's it. All right. All right. Verse 27, I just want to highlight this. Somebody read verse 27.
Okay, let me see. Is I'm there? Yeah, I'm there. Okay. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tent of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant.
All right. So here's something God is setting in order. He takes Japheth, he's going to enlarge his territory, but he says, I'm going to allow you to dwell in the tents of Shem. And so maybe this is at the point where the genealogy is supposed to be mentioned differently or in the order that it was mentioned. And this is where God exalts Shem. And the old saying is God has mercy on who he has mercy, and he blesses who he desires to bless. He gives favor who he desires to give favor. And here he favors Shem, but he says Japheth's tents will be enlarged, but that he's going to dwell. Japheth's territory is going to be enlarged, but he's going to dwell in the tent of Shem. And maybe this is where the genealogy order is set in motion for Japheth to go last. So yeah. All right. All right. Makes sense. Any other comments, questions, or thoughts? We see the special event now. All right.
Teacher, I have a question.
Okay.
Yes, so from the study, I've learned that Abraham was a Gentile before the Lord called him. So now that we are descendants of Abraham, and I received Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior, so that means that I become a Jew. How about when I backslide? Do I go back to becoming a Gentile?
Yeah. All right. So ask the question one more time, Winnie.
Yes, I was saying, if now I'm a spiritual Jew, when I backslide, what happens? Do I become a Gentile or I remain as a Jew?
Good question. Great question. Come on, Sue. You had a comment, Sue? Okay. All right. So, it goes back to fellowship and relationship. Best way I can explain it is if I have a child, we're by birth and lineage, we're always in relationship. And in relationship, there's communion and engagement, which is fellowship. And if my child disobeys or does something, or let's use Ham, it never changed his relationship from Noah. It may have broken fellowship, but it didn't change relationship. Same way with us and sin. Our relationship is always intact with God when we're his. It may change our fellowship, but it can't change the relationship. So not becoming a spiritual child and not becoming it's never the case of not becoming. It's about fellowship not being intact. And now we have to repent to restore the fellowship or to mend the fellowship again, if that makes sense. Come on, Sue.
Yeah. Thank you.
Miss Winnie?
Yes, Dr. Soup.
Hey, great question. Could you give us a little more context on what you mean when you made the statement a spiritual Jew? Could you give us a little more context on what help me share that with us?
Yes, so what I meant is before before I received Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior, I see myself like being a Gentile, because even before God called Abraham, he was a Gentile from the study that we have had. So that means before I confessed Jesus with my mouth and believed in my heart, it means I was a Gentile. But now after doing that, I became a Jew, a spiritual Jew. So I was asking, supposing I backslide, do I have to go back to becoming a Gentile, or I remain as a Jew? Yeah.
I just wanted a little clarity on your question. Pastor, you want to work with that, Pastor?
Yeah. I heard it, and I wanted to answer the first question. I think what Super is alluding to, Winnie, or maybe something we all should think about is maybe it's not necessarily being a spiritual Jew or not being a spiritual Jew to identify ourselves as a follower of Christ or belonging to God, because that was the earlier question. It's like we're God's, and it may not be necessarily around the fact of becoming a Jew or not being a Jew to identify ourselves as God's, right? How about we just say family of God, you know? So yeah, because that in the end, that's what it's about, you know, the family of God in heaven, in the Messianic era. That's where we'll be. All the families of God will be present with God. So yeah.
Have you heard the term Messianic Gentile?
I have not. I have not.
Yeah, I saw that in the First Fruits of Zion.
Yeah. Well, let me say this, John. That's the resource I lean heavily on, but it's also a resource I'm learning to distinguish from what may highlight inclusion or exclusion. All right. So yeah. Best way I can say it on the record.
I'd like to share this as food of thought real quick, Pastor. Is that when when Paul was in Galatia talking to them, they had a thing called emperor worship. And so Herod made a agreement with the emperor that if you was Jewish, you did not have to bow down before him. And it was called the Jewish exception, right? And so because they both knew that if they tried to make the Jewish people bow down before this emperor, there's going to be a fight, because the emperor considered himself a deity and their God, and the Jewish people just were not going to bow down to any other God except Yahweh, Adonai. I call him that in respect of I just call Adonai. And so so they made that agreement, and Herod says, we'll make a sacrifice for you, not to you, for you. And so he agreed. Well, if he came into town and you didn't bow, then you could get your head cut off, put in jail, or go through heavy persecution. So Paul told the Gentiles, don't crumble under this. Don't go through the Jewish proselyte system, which if you went through the Jewish proselyte system as a Gentile, you could fade in there with the Jewish people, and you'd be in the Jewish community as if you was born there. But Paul encouraged them not to do that, take the persecution and stand in Christ's followers as Gentiles and not come under that, just to avoid the persecution and suffering that comes with it. So he was even encouraging Gentile to stay, not to go through the proselyte system, just to avoid that suffering and persecution. So that may add a little light to what we was talking about, Pastor.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yep, excellent. Does that help, Winnie?
Yeah, it has helped. Thank you.
Excellent. Yep, good stuff. It does. It does. All right. And as always, you know, we said, man, we got a long, we spend a lot longer in teaching time than we do in church or most churches. But yet and still we find ourselves making the same statement week after week. Where has time gone? man. So what I want to do is I want to highlight the parallel special event. We saw the special event with Noah's son. Now let's see if we can find a special event with Abram and see how this helps us in our following God's adoption of Abram as sons, or if we want to understand the call of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. And we'll pick back up next week where we leave off today. So let's go to Genesis. Let's go back to chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10. Genesis. Let's see here. All right. Let's read verse 1. This verse 1 and 2 again. I think that's where we start. Anybody want to read Genesis chapter 10, verse 1 and 2?
Oh, I can read again.
All right.
All right. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus.
All right. So now we understand what's happening here. Now we know the ages in this order. All right. Yet Japheth still is mentioned first, and he's not the youngest. All right. And it may have something to do with the pronouncement or the blessing that God's going to enlarge his territory, but they're going to dwell in the tents of Shem. And God still honors that, you know. Yet we see Ham mentioned next. We see his relationship of his son Canaan. We understand that. We can get into that, you know, at another time to trace out genealogies. But yeah, let's go down to verse 21. Now, God intended this in this way, I believe, to really honor Shem in another way, because he's taken us through some explanations. But let's read verse 21, and we're going to go ahead and read all the way down to 32.
Okay, to Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the oldest brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almodad, Sheleth, Azarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikwa, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies and their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood.
So God is showing us that his mission or his command to his mission is being fulfilled to fill the earth. All right, that's one point. The other point is, and I haven't done a whole lot of studies, but you guys heard Leslie's pause because it's confusing. Also, to Shem, the father of all the children, Eber, the older brother of Japheth, huh? Why is that there? So children were born. So in a way, he's kind of acknowledging that Japheth is Shem's older brother. All right, and it's mentioning of it. All right. The other thing we probably never paid attention to is, where was Abram from? Where was Terah from and Abram from?
Where the U of Chadane? Let me see. The U of Chadane?
Yeah. The land of or
yeah.
All right. So possibly and Uz is interchangeable. And that land was named after one of the sons of Abram, or Abram. All right, so possibly. All right. A couple other things. Let me see here. A special event is happening before our eyes. All right. And the two sons were born to Ebner. So no wonder Ebner's name, the father of all the children of Ebner, was mentioned here this way. Remember, they changed the order for special events. So no wonder his name was mentioned, because there's a special event in the midst of this. And the two sons were born to Ebner. The name of one was Peleg. And in his days, the earth was divided. So that's the special event. So something was happening. All right. And what does this mean? The earth was divided. I hadn't done a whole lot of research, but yet that's a special event, which explains away why his name may have been mentioned. All right. Let's keep going. All right. So again, God explains the genealogies of Noah, and he shows us how the children of Noah spread throughout the earth. All right. Let's go to, unless there's any questions, let's go to chapter 11. Anybody have any questions?
Yes. I feel like I'm not. Who's the eldest son of Noah? Japheth. Okay. The older brother. Okay, hold on. Verse 21 says, is Shem also the father of all the children of Eber? So Shem is the father of all the children of Eber. And also, okay, the elder brother of Japheth. So is that saying that Shem is the elder brother of Japheth?
Nah.
Again.
What it's saying is that Japheth is the oldest brother of Shem, right? Because it says
that's how I initially read it, but I'm not sure if it's relating to some relationship between Eber and Japheth, or relationship between Japheth and Shem. I'm not totally sure.
Right.
And that's why I mentioned that's something I want to research a little more.
Okay.
Try to come back and bring clarity.
Okay. You broke up.
Pastor, I got a question. So it says that
see a special event happening.
Hold up, please. Kids, somebody was trying to talk to you.
That's Miss London. Come on.
Get the picture. Hey, Pastor. One thing that I don't know whether or not we seen it or not, but it talks about how all of them were divided and they were all had their own languages.
Yes. Yes.
And so when we pick up in chapter 11, it talks about how God diffused the languages and they all spoke different languages. So weren't they all not speaking the same language in the beginning? But it said that they're divided into their own language and clans and. You see that in verse 31.
Yes. Yes. And is that, you know how, as we mentioned, it's not a chronological order of writing. It maybe that's where the period of time where in in chapter 11, the Tower of Babel was happening, and they were divided during that particular person's lifetime. What would you think?
She exited the room. Roll on.
Okay. All right. No, great point. What I was mentioning is that's right, because what we try to read the Bible as a book of chronological order, and it's not. It's a story that highlights a point, and then it comes back and highlights another significant area of a story, and it's not an event from chapter to chapter. But this is highlighting the fact that when they pick up the story in chapter 11, where the earth was divided, maybe that's where it happened through the lifetime of Ebner and his children. And then it highlights the fact that that was established at this point, the sons of Shem, according to their family, according to the languages, by the land, and according to the nations. And then in chapter 11, it gives us some detail of what happened. So maybe that's it. Again, I'm highlighting these things because, again, I hadn't had a chance to investigate every part. As I mentioned to you guys, I was investigating this special event to try to highlight the birth order of Noah's children and Terah's sons, or Noah's sons and Terah's sons, and to kind of see how they use the same method to highlight Abram, So yeah, but we may or may not have time to look at it. We'll have to definitely pick it back up next week. So yeah. And as I mentioned, or my advice is, when we read, we may not understand everything we see. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to try to say I do, or I'm not going to try to respond with all the answers. I identify things that have some type of question around it myself. And again, that's what I highlighted in my studies. Is are they mentioning that Shem is the older brother of Japheth, or are they talking about a descendant of Ebner? I don't necessarily know yet, but I want to investigate to try to figure it out, So yeah. All right, let's look at chapter 11, verse 1. All right. And this is the statement around, some of us have read the story of the Tower of Babel. Let's see if it identifies which family line is highlighted in this. I'm not sure if it does. If I'm correct, it doesn't mention a family. It gives a story of a group of people doing it, but it doesn't highlight a particular family. Maybe intentionally. Yep, it doesn't highlight a particular family. And that's where I was saying, maybe now, verse 1 through 9 is just an explanation of how the earth was divided and how the different languages were established, as it mentioned that genealogy. The genealogy happened in chapter 10, and this is an explanation of how these languages were created, verse 1 through 9, because it picks immediately back up with the descendants of Shem. And there's a reason why it picks up with the descendants of Shem. Does anybody know?
Say that again.
I said, there's a reason why in chapter 11, God's story picks back up with the descendants of Shem. Does anybody know why God is picking back up to go back over the descendants of Shem?
It was from Shem that was the father of the faithful, right? I mean, from his line descended the faithful or something like that.
All right, come on, Will.
Well, Abraham was going to come out of that lineage.
Exactly. So
Abraham.
basically, yep. So basically, now God is trying to trace out, lead us to Abram's birth. And Abram's birth came out of the lineage or the genealogy of Shem. And God is tracing this out. So now we know this is the point God is trying to make. Or this is the adoption God is trying to show us he made of Abram. Or if I want to get spiritual, this is showing us the call of Abram. Right? Yeah. So that can go a lot of ways.
Yep.
Yep. But God is showing us this. So he goes back. So his point is Abram. His whole point is Abram. Right? So yeah. All right. And he's tracing this out from the flood to Abram. All right. And I don't want to start. But I do know Ebner is part of this genealogy. And there's something let's do it. I gotta do it before we leave. I want us to kind of spend time and thinking about it. So if somebody will, let's read verse 10, and we're going to go all the way down. This will be the last thing we do. We're going to go all the way down to verse 24. Verse 10 through 24.
I can continue.
All right.
Okay, these are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Ru. And Peleg lived after he fathered Ru 309 years and had other sons and daughters. When Ru had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug, and Ru lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor, and Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah, and Terah lived after he fathered Terah, and Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters.
Pause right there. So what we see is, for the most part, the father is mentioned, the father's age is mentioned around the birth of his firstborn child. And that birth usually is consistently around 29 to 30-something years old. So what I'm seeing is there's a special event happening. If the father's age is mentioned around 100 and something years old, then that shows there's a special event happened with some child, other than the fact that that father's name is mentioned around the firstborn son being born when he was around 20 to 30. So go all the way back to the beginning. All right. When he says in verse 12, nope, verse 11, and Shem lived 500 years and became the father of Arpachshad. He had other sons and daughters. There was something that happened in their life. We're not going to look at it now. I think I looked at it a little bit But there was a special event that happened around in HaYesod, time, which causes the order of genealogy and the mention of him to be a different age other than 30. And it kind of falls back into the consistent line in verse 12. HaYesod lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah, and HaYesod lived 400 years and 3 years after he became the father of Shelah. And he had other sons. Shelah lived 30 years. So it's mentioning their age around the birth of their firstborn child, other than the fact that there was a special event. So there was a special event happening with Shem. All right. When it mentioned HaYesod's earlier age, or his earlier age in the birth of HaYesod. We'll go back and look at that, because the reason why I point that out is you'll go back and look at the genealogy of the descendants of Shem in the other chapter, and you'll see something different, which shows us there was a special event happening. All right. But consistently, the father's age is mentioned around the birth of his eldest son. And you see that happen over and over and over. HaYesod, 35. That means he gave birth to his eldest son at 35. Shelah, 30. He gave birth to his eldest son, Eber, around the age of 30. Eber, 34. He gave birth to his eldest son, Peleg, at 34. Peleg, 30 years old, he gave birth to his eldest son, Reu, at 30 years old. Reu, 32, he gave birth to his eldest son, Sered, at age of 32. And Serug, 30 years old, he gave birth to Nahor when he was 30 years old. And Nahor, 29, he gave birth to Terah around 29. However, listen to Terah. Somebody read verse 25 and 26.
And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Terah lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
It's a special event that happened. We got to pay attention to that. We talked about this briefly. We'll cover this again. I'll give a narrative. But we see a special event happening, is that Haran died. And the next verse, somebody read 27.
Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot.
So something odd happened. Now they mention one of the brothers and the brother's son, and they hadn't done that before. All right, because something happened. Now the next verse is we see Haran die. So in his absence, it was a way to show the next person to carry on his lineage, which was Lot. All right, but we see something different in that Terah's age, when he mentioned his father and his children was 70. We talked about this. Most likely what happened is Abram was probably about 40 years younger than Nahor, Haran, his oldest brother. Somewhere around there, all right? And we see Abram must have done a noble act for his name to be mentioned. And what we see happening after they give the genealogy and that Haran had died in the presence of his father, immediately talks about Abram and Nahor taking wives for themselves. And then we see that Abram and Nahor most likely took wives of their brother's daughters. And that begins to accredit the idea back to Abram. And therefore, Abram's name was mentioned first. And it also suggests that Abram could likely be the youngest child or son and not the oldest. But it accredits an ideal or a noble act to Abram, just like we saw with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, and again, we'll look at this more in detail but I think we covered this a few weeks back. Comments, questions, or thoughts? Because I know we passed our time. But I at least wanted to make the connection from the purpose of us looking back at the sons of Noah.
I just got one quick question. So Tehran did not have any more sons and daughters?
Let me see. You know how a lot of verses say, well, he did.
He did?
Let's go back. I'm not sure. Let's go back. Read verse 24 through 26.
Now Nahon lived 29 years and became father of Tehran. And Nahon lived 119 years after he became the father of Tehran, and he had other sons and daughters.
So pause. Here you see that. If you notice, you saw that prior to. They talked about the father's age at the birth of his eldest son, and then it gave how many years he lived life after he gave birth to the eldest son. And it also gave an explanation or a narrative that he had other sons and daughters during that time.
Right.
It said that about Terah.
Well, okay, where it said that? Okay, now I'm missing.
He became the father of Nahor. It says it's about Nahor first. And then he became the father of Terah, and he had other sons and daughters.
They're talking about Nahon or Tehran?
Nahor right now.
Okay.
Now let's look at Nahor in verse 26. Read that.
And then it says, Terah lived 70 years and became father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
And if we keep reading, we never see or where it explains that he had other sons and daughters. So to answer your question, I'm not sure, because in other verses it highlighted the fact that the other forefather or grandfather had other sons and daughters. It never mentioned that Terah had other sons and daughters other than Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
Right.
Which probably was the reason why, to continue the bloodline, Abram thought it'd be a noble act to continue the bloodline of Haran, who was supposed to live out the legacy of Terah by marrying. The only way he thought they could satisfy that was by marrying the brother's daughter to continue the bloodline. All right. That's going to become important as we read the stories of Isaac and Jacob, is because that highlights an attribute of them trusting God and believing God for his promise. You know, and the promise that we live out and we live in fulfillment today is that something special, God would do something special for the people on the earth through this bloodline. And eventually that will be the Messiah, Jesus Christ, coming to the earth to die for the sins of the world. But yet people had to do special things or make special commitments in honor of their belief that God would do something special through my bloodline. And we see phenomenal things happen throughout the Bible. You know, we can go all the way back to what was Boaz's wife's name? I don't know why I can't think of her name.
Ruth. Yeah.
So even with what Ruth did, it was a statement that something inside of her possessed a belief that it would be something special through this bloodline, and I have to adhere to it, even if it meant leaving my family, becoming a family of this part of this family of God, and all the special things, because we see how important that was in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So we will see other people do special things to preserve the bloodline. And it was something of belief that happened. All right. And so it says something about that individual's belief in something that they had no reason to believe in. It was just the fact of faith and hope that my bloodline is special. And God's going to use this to do special things. And I may not see the end result of it in my lifetime, but I just need to preserve my bloodline. we see why and how that's significant to us today. So yeah. And hopefully I didn't confuse anybody anymore. Hopefully we answered some questions. If more questions, please write them down. We'll try to continue. Comments, questions, thoughts, and takeaways.
I enjoyed it, man. Once again, you just brought up a good point about the special women. Ruth is one of them. Women are very special in the Bible. That's all I want to say. And I enjoyed everything today. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate you. Any other comments, questions, or thoughts?
Hey, Leslie, I see you rocking that mini high tight natural there. I don't know, you may have made the announcement, but the word on the street is you started your own physical therapy business. Is that right?
That is not true.
Okay. All right. Sometimes the streets don't get it right. So I just want to know.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts, reflections, takeaways?
This was just good today. Yeah, this is just good. It's helping me to just refine the way that I read Torah in particular, and just how to make the connections between different chapters throughout Torah, and just seeing patterns and when patterns differ. So yeah, this is just helpful.
Excellent, phenomenal. And hopefully this helps us all do the same thing. Pay attention to the story. The story is important. And there's some significance in it. Even though it may seem irrelevant, there's relevance. So, yeah.
Well, it keeps you from rushing through the Bible.
Yes.
You just can't rush through it.
Yes. Yeah.
You're going to get bitten by a snake if you do.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's going back to how you encouraged us early on to really pay attention to these promises, and that's what we cling to, and not trying to predict how they unfold, because they'll unfold a lot of times out of pattern. They'll unfold out of what am I trying to say here? Not like A, B don't always go to C. Sometimes it jump all the way to G. But the promise is gonna hold true all the way through, though.
Right.
So that was good.
Yeah, good stuff. Excellent.
Glad to have KC on here, man. That's good. It's encouraging.
Yeah. Welcome back. All right. So look out for the recording. As I mentioned earlier, now you see why the recording is so important. You can follow along, but yeah. So yeah, to have a recording is just a valuable resource. Come on,
So how can I go back and look at the recording?
All right. So YouTube channel, I'm gonna send you the link. Everything is recorded on the God's Expectation YouTube channel. Like they say, make sure you click the button and subscribe. But yeah, so yeah. All right. Everything automatically recorded to YouTube. So yeah. All right. Anybody else? All right. With nothing else, somebody pray for us, and everybody have a blessed rest of your week. Love y'all.
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for this time we got to spend together in this community, Father. It was a blessing to have Casey on here today, Father. Hope that he got some eye-opening ideas, and hope to see him back here again next week. And also, that's it. It was always good to see you, and I'm glad that you helped me to read today. Thank you so very much for that. and Soup and everyone else, John, Wendy, Judas, and everyone else on this call. It has been a pleasure to be amongst you people today. Zena, everyone. And I just pray to God that everybody be safe and sound, and looking forward to seeing you again next week. In the name of Jesus, amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you, Fred. I mean, Will, I
Good job.
was thinking about Fred there. I was looking at his picture.
Listen to y'all. Love y'all.
All right, guys.
Now,
Love
you
y'all.
guys,
Y'all.
everybody take it easy.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.